Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome to the Avexia webinar series. Our topic for tonight is the effect of Zonulin Occludin, LPS, and food sensitivities on gut health. My name is Joanne Iverson. I am the Director of Client Relations for Avexia Diagnostics and will be your host for this evening. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming back an outstanding guest, Dr. Robert G. Silverman, who will be our presenter for this webinar. Also joining Dr. Silverman, we have James White, CEO of KBMO, sitting in on tonight's webinar, and he will get this started. But first, Dr. Silverman is a chiropractic doctor, clinical nutritionist, national and international speaker, and author of Amazon's #1 bestseller, Inside Out Health, and founder and CEO of Westchester Integrative Health Center. He graduated magna cum laude from the University of Bridgeport College of Chiropractic and has a master's of science in human nutrition. The ACA Sports Council named Dr. Silverman Sports Chiropractor of the Year in 2015. Dr. Silverman is on the advisory board for the Functional Medicine University and is a seasoned health and wellness expert on both the speaking circuits and the media. Dr. Silverman is a thought leader in his field and practice. In addition, he is frequently published author in peer-reviewed journals and other mainstream publications. Joining Dr. Silverman tonight will be Dr. Wayne Sedano, our Director of Clinical Support and Education at Avexia Diagnostics. Additionally, Dr. Sedano is the Director of Integrative Medicine Education for the College of Integrative Medicine and lectures and teaches internationally. Before we begin, just a bit of housekeeping. We encourage participation. So if you have a question, you may submit your question in the questions field in the right-hand area of the interface. We will answer the submitted questions towards the end of the presentation. Also in the interface, you should see the handout material that you can download and use as you would like to reference. Also, if your questions are not answered at the end of this evening, you will surely receive an answer by email within a day or two. Without further delay, I will now turn the webinar over first to James White to start us off.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I just wanted to again reiterate a great honor is to have Dr. Rob Silverman, the author of the Immuno Reboot and a kind of Amazon best-selling author here tonight to go over this topic. We spoke with you guys all kind of in the autumn time when we were just thinking about getting the gut barrier launched, and he's got some exciting news on how we're now about to launch with LPS as well. So we're excited to get that out and inform you all about that. Also, way more importantly, the KBMO Fitness April Avexia offer is on the screen here as well. So I just want to highlight that for everyone. We did one back in autumn that was very successful, and so we hope this is something that existing and new clients can take advantage of. So anyway, we look forward to you guys participating in this and asking many good questions. So at that point, over to you, Dr. Rob, and we're excited to hear your talk.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the collaboration and the support from both you at KBMO and Avexia. And let's dive right into the effect of Zonulin Occludin, LPS, and food sensitivities effect on gut health, or i.e. effect on possibly causing leaky gut. So James covered this really well. We'll go over it again at the end of the slide deck. 2,500 years ago, Hippocrates once said, all disease begins in the gut. 20 years ago, Dr. Alessio Fasano from Harvard, a GI doctor who found the protein enzyme zonulin, said, all disease begins in the leaky gut. A couple of quick factoids to get it all started. 90% of the scientific literature describing the microbiome has occurred in the last 5 years. The takeaway here is that we are essentially 90% bacteria. So when doctors look at us and don't realize that that number of bacteria is really an abundance or an overabundance, they're kind of looking at us with a very narrow lens of being quite myopic. Genetics are 99% bacteria. So let's dig into the ideas and what really triggers increased gut permeability, or i.e. leaky gut. Antibiotics. Now we know that we're exposed to 35 million pounds of antibiotics per year. 29 million pounds, or 80% of those, are through our food. Antibiotics are nuclear weapons for our gut permeability in that they just blow up all our ecosystems. Acid blocking drugs, PPIs, really pose a problem. PPIs are supposed to be used, if used at all, for 4 to 6 weeks. Unfortunately, they're used for months and even years. NSAIDs, non-steroid anti-inflammatories, Advil, Aleve, ibuprofen, they decrease pain, but they impair healing. Nutraceuticals, which we'll recommend, decrease pain but promote healing. So obviously, we want to be on that side of the fence. There's heavy metal exposure, there's environmental toxins. Living near a highway poses a health issue. Concussions. 60% of people that have a concussion suffer from leaky gut or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Cesarean birth is one that exposes the child to Staph aureus and not the proper bacteria that's usually predominates in the vaginal flora. Liver toxicity. The liver and the gut are bidirectional, so obviously whatever you do to your liver, you do to your gut, you do to your gut, you do to your liver. Gut dysbiosis. Anything that unlevels good and bad bacteria. One little aside, gut dysbiosis, you need about 85% or more good bacteria to avoid dysbiosis. You will see that candida can lead you down a path of gut dysbiosis. And for me, the big ticket item, food sensitivities. Food sensitivities are a critical element to determining people's, what I like to refer to as a mystery of hidden chronic inflammation. And the reason is, there's a 72-hour lag from the time of ingestion of a food to the time that symptomology shows or rears its ugly head. So how can I, as a practitioner, know what food a patient is sensitive to, and how would that patient also know that? We are obviously going to talk about yeast and bacterial overgrowth, i.e. candida, chronic stress, sleep deprivation, chronic inflammation, alcohol, and all those good foods, gluten, dairy, sugar, artificial sweeteners, all are very damaging to the gut permeability. And lastly, and sometimes truly overlooked, but the FIT 176 test does not overlook this, is food additives and emulsifiers. I think they are another hidden gem to really test for. This slide really piggybacks on the earlier slide, really speaking to the idea of how a food emulsifier can drive intestinal inflammation. And this slide really breaks down in a nice graphic representation the idea of a disruption of mucosal barrier from food additives, ultimately resulting in inflammation in the bloodstream. Fungi in the gut influence health and disease. This really speaks to candida. That, you know, most people don't realize our gut is a great place to grow things. It's wet, it's moist, and the gut basically is a consumer and a producer of nutrients. So organisms have the ability to eat and thrive in an environment that they like. Unfortunately, it's not that candida is a problem, it's the overgrowth of candida that's a problem. Now, understand that the idea of candida or fungus actually is kept in check by the immune system. Unfortunately, when that immune system is off balance, i.e. like the last 3 years with COVID and other flus, disease can usually ensue. Candida elicits a very strong immune response, and ultimately an overgrowth of candida mimics something called IBD or IBS. This slide I use all the time. I could basically talk hours on end on this slide. In the interests of the webinar time framework, let's really just look at the idea of what's going on in the gut. And when we talk about the gut, we're predominantly talking about the intestinal tract. The small intestine, which is really a misnomer, they call it small because the diameter is so small, but it is 90 to 95% of the length of the intestines. It has a surface area, if it were to be unraveled, of a tennis to a basketball court. It's a single layer epithelial cell. Through that single layer epithelial cell, its sole purpose is to filter and allow small digested food particles, vitamins and minerals, and water to go through. And on occasion, bacterial, fungus, and viruses, so the immune system in the bloodstream can test itself and keep itself sharp. Now, things that can damage or lead you down a path of leaky gut, obviously food sensitivities. It's the chicken and the egg. Was it the food sensitivities or is it the leaky gut? Which is first? Overgrowth of yeast, again, dysbiosis. However, a leaky gut can lead to a liver dysfunction. 75% of the toxins in your body coming from your gut flow to your liver through your bloodstream. 25% go through the portal vein. One anatomical note about the portal vein also communicates with the vagus nerve, which is the great wanderer throughout the body and a critical element in the superhighway to health, which we like to refer as the gut to brain axis. Leaky gut, or an increase in gut permeability, leads to blood sugar problems, insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, and diabetes. Also been shown to have a higher incidence of obesity, higher incidence of autoimmunity, hence the idea of thyroid being interlocked with gut permeability. Everybody knows I'm a chiropractor. In that, I deal with a lot of musculoskeletal pain, as many of the other practitioners on the webinar tonight. That said, leaky gut will lead to an overexpression of cytokines, inflammatory markers, which lead patients down the path of arthritis and joint pain, and also an overexpression of MMPSs, matrix metalloproteinases, which when released in abundance, eat fibrocartilage, i.e. the disc. So essentially, I just gave you a gut to joint axis and a gut to spine axis. And lastly, the gut to brain and the brain to gut, they're bidirectional. They communicate within a millisecond. Whatever you do to your gut, you do to your brain. Whatever you do to your brain, you do to your gut. So I almost don't have to speak through this. These PowerPoints really essentially talk about toxins within the gut lining. Antigens and toxins trigger inflammation in the GI tract. Those that slip through essentially lead to a heightened immune response, and that immune response comes from B and T cells. When you look at this slide, the left side of this slide has the gut in a pristine condition. On the right side, we've got the gut being leaky and inflamed. Those toxins burrow their way through the mucosal membrane cells. They get into the bloodstream. Then you have an immunological response. B and T cells are released. IgG and IgA are on the mark, and ultimately the end result is nutrient malabsorption, autoimmunity, food sensitivities, blood-brain barrier breach, and systemic inflammation. So without question, it's valuable to say that a leaky gut can lead you to a panacea of malabsorption problems and a litany of health disease type issues. So the influence of food on the brain and the gut microbiome, we could break this down. Essentially, food, good food, is a potentiator for health information. Bad food is a potentiator for information, bad information leading to inflammation. So I always tell everybody when I sit down with them, choose wisely when they choose the foods that they want to consume. It's a beautiful slide talking about the gut-to-brain axis and neuroinflammation. You're really seeing the digestive food peptides. If everything is working in a pristine condition, your body's getting all this proper absorption of nutrient. When your gut is leaky or increased intestinal permeability, or if you will, the tight junctions are now loose junctions, you'll see specific proteins getting into the blood, and you're getting an immune response, which usually is a localized inflammatory response, which will lead to a systemic inflammatory response, which will ultimately can lead to molecular mimicry and autoimmune response. And that autoimmune response can occur between the gut and brain axis. So my take, what do I believe that food sensitivities affect on health? Well, systemic inflammatory response. Everybody, as a nice little clinical gem, look at people's skin. I mean, thousands of years ago, that was one of the main diagnostic tools to look at the skin. Here are some symptomologies that you'll see with people who suffer from food sensitivities. Chiropractors, naturopaths, and the like, joint pain, muscle pain, and tightness. That's Monday morning, 9 o'clock for me all the time. GI symptoms, brain fog, anxiety, depression, and mood. Interestingly enough, most people probably nodded their head when I said food sensitivities lead to GI symptoms and brain fog. When an IRB study was performed and food sensitivities were removed, that was the second most common symptomology that abated. The number one was anxiety, depression, and mood, i.e. under the mental health format. Neurodegeneration, autoimmune, fatigue, the #1 complaint in doctors' offices today, and body composition issues all attributed to food sensitivities. Food sensitivities are not a food allergy. A food allergy is an IgE-mediated response. Food sensitivity testing should be an IgG response. So with some brevity, food sensitivities, they're on the rise, so much so that they've increased in the last few years, 50% in adults, 70% in children. As we all know, 90% of the food sensitivities are within 8 food groups: milk, soy, eggs, wheat, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, and shellfish. The 2 last bullets are the critical ones in this slide, in that, as I said before, from the time to ingestion to the time that symptomology shows, there's a 72-hour lag. So food sensitivities really vary from a food allergy, in that a food allergy you'll know right away, and a food sensitivity you have that 3-day lag. And some critical elements to test for food sensitivities, it should be an IgG test. But the key, one of the secret sauces to the KBMO FIT food sensitivity test is a test for IgG 1 through 4. There are 4 subtypes in IgG, and IgG 3, which is only 7% of the IgG, can actually stimulate an innate inflammatory marker, which is called the complement cascade, and stimulate the most inflammatory stable molecule in the body called C3d. So again, food sensitivities, for me, this was an interesting takeaway, in that even with an intact membrane, approximately 2% of ingested protein is absorbed as an immunological recognizable peptide fragment. So even if we don't have leaky gut, like I don't, I still had 11 food sensitivities, because it was either a digestion problem, which it didn't, and or there's a little break, there's a little breach in my immune system as much as I work. So yeah, I addressed those 11 food sensitivities. I took them out of my diet, because if I have food sensitivities, ultimately I could lead myself down a path of getting leaky gut. So when do providers use the FIT test? Now, there's a cornucopia of options with patients, but for me, I'd like to keep it to patients who need to lose weight, autoimmune, migraines. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. We just had a wholesale change with a 10-year-old who suffers from migraines, thyroid problems, arthritis, brain fog, fatigue, and lastly, digestive, gut, and skin problems. No surprise to the masses. So let's dig in the idea of the impact of menopause on the gut barrier dysfunction. To me, this blew my mind. One of the other speakers that work within our framework really spoke about this, and this motivated me to include this into my functional medicine armamentarium. The bottom line is, during a menopausal transitional period, which is typically a 15 to 20 year period, 40 to 60, with the females, there is an increased gut permeability. Therefore, we need to have increased testing on those women in that age group. And the key is interventions that target gut physiology during and after that menopausal transition could lessen inflammation. So it's a great example within our female counterparts, if you will, that we really need to test and not guess. This particular slide is here just for, if you will, an edification. It really shows all that's going on, and you really want to avoid the dysbiosis. You want more of a symbiosis, because whatever you do to your gut, you do to your liver, and your liver detox estrogen through 2 pathways in the liver. For the men, gut and testosterone, gut health and hormones are interconnected. LPS, which is going to be one of our breakthrough new markers, when that gets into circulation, it actually can damage the testes and decrease dramatically the levels of testosterone. So for me, if I can take a moment, those who come in with low testosterone, it's very common that a lot of our medical colleagues want to give them testosterone type of creams and hormone type of injections. What I found, if you address their blood sugar and most commonly their gut health, their testosterone will increase dramatically within a 3-month period. So let's really dig in. Let's talk about IgG food sensitivity. So the mechanism of immune and non-immune mediated reactions to the food, where I circled was the IgG and immune complexes. So where this test differs not just in accuracy, and the reason it's more accurate and more specific, etc., is because we're using IgG 1 through 4, which is able to isolate whether these immune complexes and this complement cascade is activated. So one of the things I like, and I'm a big believer in, a compliant patient is a more successful patient. We have a better encounter. Take a look at the client report. Without question, it's color coordinated, and it makes it easy for me to see, for me to interpret, and clearly for me to elucidate the interpretation with these visual aids for the patient. So red is actually a 4, so that's a high response. Orange is a 3, it's a high response, obviously not as high as red. We also have yellow, which is labeled a 2, which is a response. And for me, the lime green is also a response. My little clinical takeaway is if you have more than 10 food sensitivities that are yellow, orange, or red, you count up the lime and you remove the ones that are in the lime for 1 month. Normally, you're going to remove food sensitivities for a period of 3 months before reintroduction. And added to the FIT 176. And a lot of people ask me about the 176 and the 132. I only do the 176 because if I'm in, I'm going all the way in. I get all the food additives and emulsifiers as well. But just to see that we're keeping up with the Joneses, if you will, here's some of the new foods that we're testing for in the 176. You know, in dairy, you're looking at sheep's milk, additive stevia, very commonly used. I mean, we all know the other artificial sweeteners, sans erythritol, Splenda, Equal, and the like, all no bueno, if you will. A lot of the grains, which are ancient grains, and they call them grains because they are cooked like a grain, specific fruits that have become more popular. Some of the extracts and miscellaneous coconut oil, hemp protein, honey, maple syrup, seeds like chia and hemp. So you're really seeing this as an up-to-date version. Some of the other lists that I've seen before really haven't come into 2023, if you will. Now, this slide really exemplifies the idea that many testing centers only do IgG and IgG 1 through 2. This one is a dual purpose where you're using IgG 1 through 4 and also testing for the complement. So people say, why do I test for leaky gut? Rob, you just made a compelling argument that everybody has leaky gut. Well, not necessarily everybody, but we know people who have leaky gut can get a food sensitivity. People who have a food sensitivity can get a leaky gut. So again, it begs the question, why test for increased intestinal permeability? Well, I believe that testing and not guessing leads to improved patient compliance and motivation. It also puts you in a status where you can show a before and after view. Now, that said, here is the new FIT gut barrier panel. So let's take a look at this, and feel free to ask a lot of questions. Very fortunate to have James on tonight so he can really go through what's going on inside the lab if anybody has any questions. That said, we're testing in this gut barrier panel for candida, or an overgrowth, like I said before, of candida, an overgrowth of yeast. We're testing for zonulin. Zonulin is a protein enzyme. I am going to pop on my video. I can't see it, so I assume everybody can see it. Let me know if you can't see me, everybody. So zonulin is a protein enzyme. Occludin is the structural part. Here is one epithelial cell in the gut. Here's another. They bind together. This is what we call a tight junction. It's nice and tight. When zonulin is increased on the inside, it increases the pull of these epithelial junctions and can lead you from a tight to a looser junction. Whereas occludin will, if it's elevated, shows you that there's structural compromise at the tight junction level. So zonulin is a functional pull. Occludin is a structural pull. LPS, interesting, lipopolysaccharide. This is the new add to the gut barrier panel. You asked for it, you got it. Lipopolysaccharide stays on the inside of the intestinal wall, holding gram-negative bacteria. It hangs on the inside, but the outside of the inside wall. Now, obviously, if LPS is expressed, there's a lot of gram-negative bacteria, and this is going to be something that's much more deleterious than just a little dysbiosis. So the gut barrier panel, we're going to break it down. It's doing, again, a dual pathway. It's testing for what I like to refer to as IgA 1 and 2. Now, IgA is secretory. That's at the mucosal level, in that it also shows an early onset of damage. So IgG 1 through 4 will now show you a longer period of time of exposure to a candida, zonulin, occludin, and LPS. That IgG also is back tested with that C3D. So here's a dual pathway test, testing both the adaptive and the innate immune system. You'll see a slide, I'll pick up the pace in a little while, in that I believe this is an immune barrier test. And here's why. There's 3 lines of defense. Line number 1 is our skin and our digestive tract, i.e. our gut barrier panel. Line number 2 is in our innate immune system, which is tested for a C3D. And line number 3 is our adaptive immune system, tested by the IgGs. So you can take this a step further. So as we go into some new frontiers, you really can explain and explicate to many different of your patients how involved and how revealing these test results can be. So very quickly, IgG, we all heard about it in the news, 75% of the total immunoglobulins. It's the smallest one. It passes through the placenta, gets to the fetus. It has a half-life of 21 to 23 days. The takeaway here is I'm a big believer in removing a food sensitivity that stimulated an IgG response for 4 half-lives, which is 12 weeks. I'm not going to go into detail in this slide. This slide really shows that when you have antibodies, they can damage the gut lining and cause autoimmunity at the gut lining, and they can also stimulate this immune complex and complement cascade. Essentially, the complement systems, you know, it's really funny. I'm sure we'll get Dr. Wayne on in a moment, and he'll probably say when he lectures and people ask questions, most people are not discussing the complement system in C3D, but it is a part of the innate immune system that can be stimulated by the adaptive immune system. IgG, as you know, is secretory. It's at the gut and mucosal levels. Candida, you'll see it in different parts, most predominantly in the gut, also in the mouth and the skin. It grows when good bacteria is suppressed. So basically, you will typically see dysbiosis with an association and overexpression of candida. Zonulin, again, this protein was found by Dr. Fasano, is a protein that opens up the tight junctions at a functional level. Here are the 2 biggest stimuli, gliadin, which we know is a protein from gluten. Gluten means glue. For as far as I'm concerned, gluten is a no bueno. And intestinal bacteria are adverse or bad bacteria versus beneficial bacteria. They're the main triggers for the zonulin release. Digging into zonulin a little more, it's a key marker for intestinal permeability. It's the only reversible regulator of intestinal permeability. Typically, an elevated level of zonulin will be seen with the aforementioned conditions like celiac disease, autoimmune, adult glucose intolerance, inflammatory bowel, obesity, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, non-alcoholic fatty liver, and type 1 diabetes. So this slide speaks to higher levels of zonulin with waist circumference, blood pressure. Incidentally, I believe blood pressure is a huge longevity marker, fasting glucose, metabolic diseases. So for me, zonulin isn't just a gut marker. Zonulin is an overall systemic health marker. So when people talk about health, immunity, and longevity, I believe zonulin should be on that list with the other interleukins and the blood pressures and the uric acid. The real question, which I'd love to open a discussion on, is it the expression of zonulin just because the gut, or is it zonulin in itself also inflammatory? Occludin, 15 years of data really showing occludin is a critical element. The clinical gem is occludin is essential for tight junction stability and barrier function. Batman and Robin, zonulin and occludin, are the gatekeepers of tight junctions. So when they're functioning properly, nothing's getting through that tight junction that shouldn't. When they're elevated, those tight junctions are now loose junctions. Chaos can ensue. So I put this slide together on LPS. So let's take it point at a time, if you will. LPS, as I said before, is a major outer surface membrane, components present in almost all negative bacteria. The bacteria of the gram-negative such are pathogenic. They are real strong stimulators of innate immunity in humans. They're endotoxins. They stimulate inflammatory cytokines. And the big thing about LPS is that not only that it crosses the blood-brain barrier and can cause neuroautoimmunity in the brain, it seems to hitchhike and harbinger on multitude and various organs. So LPS expression can lead you down a path of joint problems, brain problems, liver problems. This slide really speaks to the idea of once it gets LPS outside the gut, it can cause a lot of extraintestinal issues. This slide speaks to the idea of LPS expression damaging the joint, the heart, 3 times the incidence of heart disease when LPS is expressed. Immune modulation, liver dysfunction, brain issues, lung issues, thyroid, of course, Hashimoto's, and metabolic disorders. LPS, this is one of the headier slides, so get your seatbelt on, let's get in. LPS, when expressed, can attach to toll-like receptor 4 on the gut. When it attaches to toll-like receptor 4 has a dual purpose signal. Signal number 1 is the stimulation of NF-kappa B, which is inflammatory, which leads us down the path of the expression of interleukins and cytokines. In addition, LPS also stimulates and damages mitochondria. Maybe our longevity markers would be different if we wouldn't have mitochondrial dysfunction. How do you block these 2 signals? Well, number 1, try not to have a leaky gut. Number 2, block LPS by using omega-3 fatty acids. They block the adherence of LPS to toll-like receptor 4. And for signal 2 is ketone bodies for those who are writing down protocols. So LPS is a potent endotoxin. It's a main component of cell wall of gram-negative bacteria that colonizes the intestines. The bottom line is increased LPS absorption leads to increased endotoxemia and increased inflammation. And the ultimate takeaway is increased gut permeability leads to increased endotoxin absorption in the bloodstream. Huge takeaway with COVID. One of the things I ask all my patients are, have you had COVID in the last year? How has your health been since you've had COVID? Data indicates that there's been a steep increase in zonulin release, LPS, and occludin release post-COVID. COVID seemed to cause leaky gut. It caused leaky gut for a couple of reasons. Number 1, it is a spot where we housed this gnarly virus. Number 2, it's where we shed the virus. And number 3, COVID causes a B cell expansion of antibodies. B cell expansion of antibodies has shown not to let the epithelial and stromal cells at the gut levels heal. Therefore, in a myriad of ways, it can cause leaky gut. Bottom line, COVID patients have increased risk of developing GI disorders. So here's some of the problems till KBMO really perfected their test. Some of the problems with the zonulin protein. Number 1, there was cross-reactivity. There are organisms that are structurally similar or identical to zonulin, like haptoglobin and purpudin. But these complement fragments blocked zonulin binding, resulting in what they called low positivity rates. In my instances, I've seen some labs with high positivity rates. Sample time and the concentration of serum varied widely during the day, and the sample type, it's always that question, is it serum or is it, the poop test? Well, by using a specific recombinant zonulin protein and using the zonulin IgG antibody, you eliminate the haptoglobin propionine and complement fragment cross-reactivity. You increase the positivity rate to an appropriate rate, or I should say, you get a more specific, sensitive type of rate. Your serum timing is stable. It assures accurate measurements. And one of the bigger takeaways is it's a blood spot, which is shown to be more accurate for zonulin and or a serum test. Now, a lot of people ask about the blood spot. I like the blood spot. I'm a chiropractor. It's fast. It's easy. I don't draw in my office. Some people do. So you have those two options. The blood spot has shown to be within 3 to 5% according to the NIH. So you're really getting a test that is equal to the serum, which you can send to somebody's home. Now you're looking at the patient report, the gut barrier panel, candida, zonulin occludin, and soon to be seen, LPS with the food sensitivity. So the left side shows the food sensitivities, the right side shows the gut barrier. Now the doctor has the ability to truly explain all the terrain that's needed to be discussed between the combination of food sensitivities, gut barrier panel. And remember, I tell my patients the gut barrier panel is also a 3-line of defense immune system panel. So people say the FIT test, which is a food inflammation test. Why do providers use it? Well, the dual pathway measurement. Remember, acquired immunity measures antibody IgG 1 through 4. Innate immunity measures complement C3d, the most stable inflammatory molecule in the body. The bottom line is food sensitivities, inflammation, and gut permeability are all revealed with results in one test. Talked about this a little bit before, but I think it warrants a quick glossing over. The immune system provides 3 levels of defense against disease-causing organisms. The barrier, of course, we've got the skin and the mucous membranes, digestive enzymes, and of course, what's going on in the gut. You're seeing that with the gut barrier panel. The innate immunity, which are your macrophages, they are your 365, 24/7 soldiers. They're your sentinels of your immune system. That can be tested with the C3d complement. And lastly, your acquired immunity, those are your B and T cells. Your B cells, obviously IgA and IgG are standouts. So let's look at some clinical studies. And then, of course, we're going to open it up for some questions. So essentially, you're looking at the FIT test clinical. You have a test before elimination. Here are all the symptomologies. Look how elevated they are on the left. Yet all you did without any supplementation, any exercise, any lifestyle changes other than take away the food sensitivities. Look at the precipitous drop in the left to the right side. This list really shows it. So again, at the top of the list, just taking the foods out, you had a tremendous decrease in memory, concentration, anxiety, mood, and depression. Number 2 is bloating, stomach pain, and fatigue. Now imagine taking the foods out, using your treatments in your office, following my 7R program or a program of your own liking, you're really going to get outstanding revolutionary type of outcomes using this as your baseline test. Here's an IBS clinical study results. Take another step. Now here you're looking at an IBS severity score. You're looking at a numerical score. So you have the intervention group and the control group. You see a 3-time decrease in the intervention group over the control group. Homocysteine, marker for stroke, as we all know, and we all know it's a possible adverse reading because of methylation. However, in this study, and we all know that blood serums are objective, the control group actually was still increasing homocysteine, whereas the intervention group got a decrease. I mean, that's a huge takeaway. C-reactive protein, tissue inflammatory marker, 5 times more effective in the intervention group in a decrease. So people ask clinical outcomes in irritable bowel syndrome greatly improve when using the FIT test. Well, the FIT test resulted in twice the IBS severity score reduction compared with other cellular tests. FIT test resulted in a 50% improvement in IBS severity score compared with other tests that measured only IgG. and I think many of them are doing IgG 1 and 2. Some may be doing IgG 1 through 4, which really again speaks to the idea how critical it was to add the complement C3D marker into the test. So in conclusion, the KBMO FIT test measures 176 foods, colorings, additives, emulsifiers. It's a dual pathway detection technology using IgG, IgA, and the complement. The complement generates inflammation test. We all know, we talked about it, C3D. The new ads, the anti-zonulin antibody, it's a true marker of gut permeability. Adding the LPS, huge takeaway. Obviously, this unique gut barrier panel now includes LPS, and all the outcomes are backed by IRB approved clinical studies. So my 7R program, I'm going to take a minute with this. If you saw me in the autumn, you know that we went through this. Avexia and James will be very happy to share my protocols. I'm just moving James for a quick second. He got in front of my. It's all good. It's okay. It's funny. I did.
That wasn't intentional. Let me come out.
No. Stay there. I like it. You're inspiring me for greatness. You're imbuing my body with enthusiasm. So let's take a quick look. The reset. The reset button is interesting in that the idea is reset what? Reset your diet, your lifestyle, your mindset. So obviously no gluten, no dairy, things of that nature. Value your health. Remove what? Remove your food sensitivities here. You also want to remove your unwanted pathogens. Replace what? Digestive enzymes, stomach acid, pancreatic enzymes. You're going to use a plethora of different nutrients to regenerate damaged intestinal mucosa. Reinoculate with what? Quality pre and probiotics, and make a postbiotic. Reintroduction. This is where you can either retest. I believe this should be retest and reintroduce. So I retest at this part, and I also then slowly reintroduce certain foods. I think that'll be a question that people will have for us. And the 7R is to retain your health and GI integrity. So zonulin and occludin supplementation, probiotics, zinc, carnosine, L-glutamine, collagen peptides, curcumin, glucosamine HCl. These are great things if it's just a tight junction. Again, everybody's going to get a copy of my slide deck. So for me, the most effective clinical outcomes across all disease spectrums can result from the normalization of gut function. Test and not guess, everybody. A shameless plug, my new book came out. James was nice enough to mention an Immune Reboot, came out in December. Chapter 5 is all about the 7R program, and throughout the book, we talk about food sensitivity testing. What I'll do is the first 3 people who give James their email, I'll get you a PDF copy. So let's open it up for some questions. James, did you want to do questions now, gentlemen, or in a bit?
I think, do you want to go through the Avexia stuff? Yeah, that'd be good, and then we can go to questions afterwards.
Sure. Dr. Silverman, that was amazing. I really wanted just to see if Dr. Sedano wanted to chime in. I know he gets a lot of questions on the various different testing that's available. I'd love his feedback on the presentation and any other comments he would like to start out with.
Well, thanks, Joanne. Doc, you really covered your bases here, and I was glad to see that the LPS is being added. That really completes the gut barrier panel. And James, thank you so much for providing that to our clinicians. And this is a very, very powerful tool. I was excited, as you know, to see that the gut barrier was included in here, and I think it's just a bonus, and it's a perfect match. And I encourage any and all clinicians to use this. As you know, most patients come in, what are they? It's gut. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Well, let's go ahead and just open this up to questions, and this probably would be, Dr. Silverman. Let's see. Let me look through what we have here. How do you differentiate between the memory response and the inflammatory response?
Memory and inflammatory. Interesting. So what I'm going to take that question as is that IgG is at the level response, at the gut level response, IgA, excuse me. IgA is at the mucosal lining, and IgG is over a duration of time. So I'm not sure what they mean memory. I mean, I think what they're trying to say is maybe they had a food sensitivity for a period ago, maybe a year, maybe 4 or 5 years. But those antibodies, see, people always think that antibodies last forever. We're finding out that some people don't even produce antibodies, or they don't produce antibodies that last forever. So even though the IgG is a duration marker, it's not a duration marker for 10 years.
I don't know whether it might be that. You might be talking about the MRT test. Maybe is it that, you think?
I was guessing about half-life of IgG.
Okay. We got 3 different answers with 1 question. That's impressive. So that's okay.
Yeah. So whoever asked the question, could they expand on that a little bit?
Exactly. Who got it right? Wayne, James, or Dr. Rob?
Thanks. In the meantime, there were a couple questions in here just on how this FIT test compares to MRT.
Oh, there we go.
James, you want to take that one?
Let me tell them, yeah. So MRT is a great test. It's looking at the shrinking of the white blood cells. They do a very nice job around that. It's an indirect measurement in terms of, as I was suggesting, what the assumption is that when those white blood cells shrink, then that leads to some level of food sensitivity. A bit like ALCAT, which is looking at the swelling of those white blood cells. So again, both of them very good tests, but they're indirect versus when you compare it to the FIT test, it's a direct measurement of the IgG1 through 4 and the complement activation. As someone nicely said to me the other day, James, what we love about your test is it's measuring the whole immune system versus just half the immune system in terms of the IgG. And so that the innate immune system is what we pick up with the complement, and in essence gives us a way of having a secondary screen. So the first one, in terms with the IgG, sometimes it gets leveled at, you know, the problem with IgG is it's just telling you what you're exposed to. So I think that the nice thing with this test, it goes on and gives you that secondary screen to say, okay, of the foods you're exposed to, way more importantly, which ones actually lead to an inflammatory response. And as we all know, that's the kind of root cause of many ill and many of the symptoms that patients kind of come up with. Dr. Rob, or anyone else want to add to that?
I like the fact that you said, you know, you heard me say it before, that it's the whole immune system. So it's all 3/3, because when you've had the gut barrier panel, we forget about that first line of defense. But it is true that it's a critical element. Just because you have an antibody doesn't mean you have inflammation. And for us, at least what I see in clinical practice, and I'm sure Dr. Wayne would love to chime in on this, if I could have a credo, it would be to manage and modulate inflammation.
Dr. Sedano, any response?
If this was a UK one, I'd say he's out making a cup of tea, but I don't think he's doing that. So.
Yeah, if we're talking about inflammation, well, I look at if there's glucose dysregulation, well, that is total systemic inflammation in and of itself. So that's in combining that with looking at the inflammation in the gut, we definitely want to address that. As far as the MRT, and maybe James could speak a little bit more about that. I know there was a question on MRT. It's my understanding that's the mediator release test, is it not? They're looking for a release of the chemical mediators in that as it reacts to food. I have done a lot of research on. I have not found a plethora of research on the mediator. I don't know if James, if you have, or Dr. Rob, if you have found significant amount of research in peer review on that. And if someone does, please send it to us.
I think James said it. It's testing the white blood cells. So the accuracy is still a debatable issue.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they do a very good job of the measurement of that. So I don't think it's an issue of the accuracy of that. More, I think the reality is what we hear from providers is because there's multiple reasons why those white blood cells might shrink, sometimes it leads to false positives. So as I say, I think they do a great job of measuring that shrinking of those white blood cells, but I think it's more that can sometimes create false positives because there's other reasons that they may shrink. bit like with ALCAT, where you see the swelling, same thing. They do a great job of measuring that swelling, but as it's an indirect method, sometimes you'll see some false positives. Is what I hear from providers.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let me just see what else I have in here. Questions with that. So will the fit test, the fit test will provide information on the inflammatory response versus just the antibody presence.
No, it does both.
Yeah, correct. It does both. So in essence, it's a double screen, as I just mentioned. So what you're doing is you're measuring the IgG, but then you're going on to measure of the ones which are you're exposed to, i.e. the IgG foods, which ones actually are causing an inflammatory response. And so that's the difference with this test, is measuring that secondary part, which helps, in essence, really eliminate those false positives, which, again, when you look through the literature, sometimes that's a knock level that some of the IgG-only tests is that you get a lot of false positives. A good example of that is I ran an Everly Well test on myself, and I came up with 20 foods. When I ran the fit test, I came up with 5. So as you can imagine, from a compliance standpoint, that's really helpful for a patient if you can really zero in on the key foods which are causing inflammation versus telling you which foods you're actually exposed to, which, as we all know, unfortunately, we all have to be exposed to some foods. So that's not generally as helpful as knowing which ones are causing inflammation.
I want to compliment to our listeners. Now, complements are proteins that are produced mainly by the liver. So what do? They complement the immune system. So what this test does, just for clarity, it's looking at the IgG 1 through 4, but also looking at the complement, the liver production, and particularly C3D. That is, it looks at a twofold approach. So you're getting a double look. I know Dr. Rob had said that, but just for clarification of, yes, that this thing is really reacting, because not only are we getting the IgG reaction or antibodies created, you're getting the immune system, the complement. And those of you that have done Lyme testing, you're looking at C4 complement is jacked up with that, other immune systems, so the diseases. So this is a wonderful test, bottom line.
Great summation. I'm going to say just to piggyback on what James had said, accuracy leads to outcome.
Yeah.
Yep.
Twofold look, so, which is good.
All right, let's go ahead and move on maybe to the next slide. Now that we have learned about food sensitivity and zonulin, I would love to review how to order it before concluding with the webinar. Dr. Silverman, if there's the next slide. Just a reminder for our practitioners, ask the doctor. Dr. Sedano is on live with us tonight. Huge, wonderful service we have here with Avexia. Any help with lab interpretation, questions on clinical conditions. You run a food sensitivity test and you want those results reviewed with Dr. Sedano. On your left-hand side of your Avexia account, you're able to see Ask the Doctor. Again, we have a free email consultation that you can go in and ask questions on anything, review results. We also offer a live consultation. We do charge for that, but you can get right on his Zoom meeting and be able to proceed with that. Very, very valuable for our practitioners. So let's move to the next slide. And then really just how to go ahead and order anything with KBMO. You will want to log into your Avexia account from the quick links located on the left-hand side of your account from the dashboard. Then you will select or create a patient to assign that order to. So once you've entered them into the system, you will click on Specialty Labs. Then you can go to the KBMO test menu. It will be the first drop-down box. You'll be able to see the various panels or the various profiles you can add. Locate the fit test 132, 176 as we talked about, and go ahead and add it to the cart, and then go ahead and just place your order. Again, orders can be paid for directly by patients or clients, or we can bill the clinician's account when those results come back. So it's really just that simple. Next slide. And then really for any questions or issues, you may contact Avexia by email at info@avexiadiagnostics.com or by phone. We are here Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with our phone number on here. The questions that haven't been answered, and again, the recording link will be provided for everybody that has been here with us tonight. Thank you so much, Dr. Silverman, Dr. Sedano, James White, for this informative presentation. And again, that recording will be available within the next day or two. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Until next time, from everyone at Avexia Diagnostics and KBMO, stay healthy, stay safe, and we wish you all the best on your pathway to wellness. Thank you so much. Good night.